Welcome back to the deep dive. We always try to take your sources, really get into them, and pull out the key ideas so you walk away understanding what's going on. Today, though, our source material is, well, it's different. It's super concise. Less like a stack of papers, more like one really interesting core idea.
That's right. Yeah, today we're really digging into this whole concept that's basically just laid out in a title. It's a sabbatical in English, reset your life and your English, talk about taking time off. Quite a bit packed in there.
Yeah, it is. And what jumps out at me right away is that this isn't just about, kicking back and relaxing. The source isn't just saying take a break. It sounds like it's suggesting a pretty complex dual-purpose life strategy.
Absolutely. I think for you, the listener, the main takeaway is this. The idea of taking that extended, really dedicated time off, the taking time off part, well, it should be planned, structured strategically, so you hit two big goals at once. You get that deep personal renewal, and you make real focused progress in your language skills. It kind of turns that downtime into a super efficient growth period.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's dig into how this strategy actually works. We start with that first promise, the personal side. Reset your life. When the source mentions a sabbatical, it feels like it means a lot more than just, being away from your desk. What exactly is this reset?
Well, it really hinges on being intentional. A proper reset, it goes way beyond just physical rest. Physical rest is more like...
recovery.
Right, you're recovering from stress. But a reset, the way the source seems to frame it, is active. It's proactive. It's about carving out the mental space you need to evaluate things properly. Analyzing where you are, where you're headed, and then consciously setting a new course for, well, whatever's next in your life.
Right, so the daily grind, the routine... that can kind of hide burnout or maybe that feeling you're on the wrong track. So the reset is like hitting an intentional pause button, forcing you to look at the big picture.
Exactly. And what does that actually involve? Is it just, lying on a beach somewhere, or is there more structure implied?
That's what I was wondering.
It definitely implies structure. To really reset, you probably need some tools. The source doesn't explicitly list them, but it suggests things like maybe dedicated journaling or using some kind of self-reflection framework, or even just making time for those important but not urgent things that help clarify your values, like reading those big books you always meant to. These things involve a kind of deep conversation with yourself. You're trying to figure out if the life you have is the life you actually want.
Okay, but let me push back on this a bit because it's where it feels maybe a little risky. I mean, the main point of a sabbatical is usually renewal, right?
Yeah.
Getting refreshed. So doesn't adding a really demanding, structured goal, like getting fluent in another language, doesn't that kind of defeat the purpose of the reset? Isn't this source just swapping out job burnout for, language learning stress?
That's a really fair question, a very important one, but I think the source would actually argue the opposite. If you think about the bigger picture, why do resets sometimes fail? Often it's because there's no structure. People get the physical rest, sure, but then they just sort of drift. And that lack of direction can create its own kind of anxiety. So by pairing the personal reset with a concrete secondary goal, like improving your English, you actually give that introspection a kind of container.
A container? How do you mean?
Yeah, like the structure of the language goal helps prevent that aimless feeling. You're still resting, you're still reflecting, but the fact that you need to articulate your new thoughts, your new plans in English, it anchors the whole process. So that clear mental space you gain from the reset, that becomes the essential foundation you need for the second, arguably harder goal.
Okay, that changes how I see it. So the language task isn't pressure, it's like a guardrail.
Yeah.
It keeps the reset focused.
Precisely. You need that clear mind to really focus on deliberate practice and complex thinking anyway.
Right. So assuming you've achieved that foundational clear headspace, how does the source suggest you weave in the second goal, the English proficiency part? This gets us to that really intriguing core idea, reset your life and your English. Why link these two so specifically? Why do the sabbatical in English?
Well, I think it comes down to maximizing your return on that time investment. It's about efficiency. The source seems to recognize that often traditional language learning is kind of separate from real life. We study generic dialogues, academic texts, maybe stuff that doesn't really connect to our own lives.
And we forget it almost immediately because there's no real stake in it, no emotional connection.
Exactly. So what the strategy does is it turns the sabbatical itself into the ultimate learning lab with really high stakes. The personal stuff, you're figuring out where to travel, maybe what course to take, what new routine to try, who you need to talk to. That becomes the actual content you have to communicate about. The source is basically saying you move from just passively studying the language to to actively using it because you have a real immediate personal need to.
Okay, so instead of practicing, say, the future tense by talking about the weather next week, you're using the future tense to map out the next phase of your career plan, maybe to someone who could help you. The stakes are just way higher.
And the learning sticks much better because of it. Think about it. If your sabbatical involves travel or maybe moving somewhere short term or trying to launch some personal project, it forces you to use English to solve actual problems, important ones. You might need to navigate bureaucracy, find housing, understand local rules, pitch an idea, all in English.
So the situation itself provides the immersion. The goal isn't just learn English. The goal is use English to make this life reset happen.
Right. And what's really interesting here is this underlying idea that time off is only truly productive if it has that clear secondary intellectual goal baked in. It kind of tackles that guilt people sometimes feel about taking a long break, doesn't it? It reframes it as acquiring a measurable asset fluency.
Which brings us neatly to the last part of this title, and maybe the most challenging bit from a language perspective. Talk about taking time off. This seems to shift the focus completely. It's not just about the internal planning anymore, it's about the external communication you need to do to actually make the sabbatical happen, which could be pretty high stakes itself.
Oh, absolutely. This is where the source really throws down the gauntlet for an advanced learner. Because genuinely, talking about taking time off in English, that requires way more than just casual chit-chat. It's complex. It involves negotiation, explaining your past actions, justifying future plans, all rolled into one tricky communication task.
Yeah, when you break down the kinds of conversations involved, you might be negotiating the terms with your boss or HR, or explaining a big financial decision to your family, reflecting on why you've earned this time, or outlining what you hope to achieve in the next 6 months or year. These aren't simple conversations. They demand a high level of linguistic skill.
That's exactly right. And let's look at the actual language tools you need for this. To handle these kinds of discussions well, you really need to have mastered several advanced grammatical structures, and it's important to see why they're so crucial for this specific purpose.
Okay, yeah. Let's focus on those tools. What are we talking about?
Well, take conditional clauses, for example. Your if-then statements. You absolutely need these for negotiation, for discussing possibilities. You're not just stating, I'm taking 6 months off. You're often proposing scenarios, right? Like, okay, if I come back after 4 months, then I'll be ready for Project X. But if I take the full 6 months, then I could potentially lead Project Y from the beginning. See, your ability to negotiate effectively hinges on being able to clearly articulate those complex conditional outcomes in English.
That makes total sense. Negotiation is the language of what-ifs. Okay, what about looking back? Explaining the why.
That's where the past perfect tense becomes really important. Had done, had hoped, had achieved. To justify a reset, you often need to talk about what you had already accomplished before, say, burnout hit. Or maybe what you had hoped your previous approach would achieve but didn't. You might say something like, look, I had already hit all my targets for the year before I realized I needed this kind of strategic pause. Using the past perfect lets you contrast that prior state with your current situation. It adds a layer of maturity and depth to your explanation.
Okay, got it. Conditional for the future possibilities, past perfect for the context and justification. What else? You mentioned the audience.
Right. And this is crucial. You don't talk to your boss the same way you talk to your partner or your friends about this, do you? So this whole process forces the learner to get really good at register shifts, switching your style. You need that very formal, precise, careful language when you're discussing contracts or leave policies with HR, for example. But then you need to shift seamlessly to maybe a more informal but still persuasive and perhaps empathetic tone when you're talking through the personal or financial side with family. Being able to navigate those different registers, choosing the right vocabulary, the right tone, even sentence structure, that's a really advanced skill. And planning a sabbatical forces you to practice it intensely.
Oh, wow. Okay, so that complexity, negotiating, justifying, reflecting strategically, that's much richer, much deeper language practice than, following a script in a textbook. It's stickier because it's real.
Which leads to maybe the most powerful implication from the source. Is the real language lesson here actually the planning and discussion phase, the part that happens before you even pack your bags? Just figuring out how to make the sabbatical happen forces you to operate at your highest linguistic level to achieve a really important personal goal.
That really is an efficiency hack, isn't it, for personal growth? It takes this big, slightly abstract idea, taking time off, and turns it into concrete communication challenges that demand advanced English. Okay, so let me try and quickly summarize the core takeaway here for you, the listener. What this source seems to be suggesting is that this idea of a strategic sabbatical, a focused life reset, it's actually the perfect vehicle for serious English improvement, a really high-stakes one. It gives you both the clear headspace you need for learning and the complex real-world conversations required for genuine, advanced progress. And here's where it gets really interesting, connecting it maybe to a bigger idea.
Yeah, I think if you zoom out, the source is making a broader argument. It's saying that our biggest life decisions, the ones that involve negotiation, deep thought, planning, they shouldn't just be one-off events. They should be seen as built-in opportunities for intentional learning, for integration. It's basically an argument for transforming necessary downtime, or big transition points, into dual-purpose development. You renew yourself, and you upgrade a critical skill like your English fluency at the same time.
So every major life change becomes a chance not just to live differently, but to learn how to communicate better about the life you're actively trying to build.
Exactly. It's arguably the most productive kind of self-investment you can make.
Well, thank you for bringing this source to us. It's incredibly focused, but wow, it packs a punch. Really shows how strategy and language learning can be, well, deeply connected.
Absolutely. And maybe as you, the listener, think about how this might apply. We can leave you with a final thought, something to chew on, building on the source's framework. If planning a sabbatical is such a great workout for your advanced language skills, what other big personal or professional goal are you already turning over in your mind right now? Maybe it's a career change, a major purchase, a tricky negotiation you need to have, maybe even relocating. Could you start discussing that goal, debating it, planning it out loud, maybe even just journaling about it, using all its complex linguistic details in English, starting today?